Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another OpenShift Commons. I'm Karina Angel, a product manager on the OpenShift team. And today we're here with Eric Minick from IBM, who's going to be talking about DevOps at the speed of architecture. And stick around for the Q&A with our very own Brian Gracely will be joining. So please take it away, Eric. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Karina. Thanks for having me. This is a topic I'm really excited about because I remember very clearly, it was probably now 6 or 7 years ago. I was reading one of Jez Humpel's books, the Lean Enterprise, I think it was in, and I saw this graphic, which I thought expressed what was going on in DevOps really, really clearly. And he credits Paul Hammett with creating it. Paul's done a bunch of great work over at ThoughtWorks. I've modernized this thing, and I want to spend the next 20 or 30 minutes just talking about this one perspective, because what I hear from people out in the industry all the time is like, oh, I was reading this blog and it said that feature flags were the only important thing in DevOps, but we don't use feature flags and I seem to be doing fine. Or I read one blog and it says that I have to be using cloud to really accelerate. And then I go look at another announcement and it's all about how powerful mainframe DevOps is. And I'm really confused. And I think it's legitimately confusing. And that's because there's different flavors of DevOps and they've got some things in common. And one of the things that can be most painful is when you're using bits and pieces out of different flavors that aren't really compatible. So I want to share a way of thinking about it, some ways as you're improving your delivery and going faster to know what's likely to break next, where the next pain point's going to be, all from one perspective. So let's get into it. This is the slide we're going to look at today, and it's a little overwhelming, so we're going to break it into pieces. But the basic idea here is that you've got a lot of things going on in how you deliver software, right? How you deliver innovation is impacted by your agile development methodologies and branching strategies, how you go about testing, how you go about CI/CD activities, your architecture, your infrastructure, and what you have on the back end to do your monitoring, right? It's all interrelated. And I think if you look at a state of DevOps report from the Dora team, you see a lot of these same elements all coming together into predicting high performance and architecture and all of that. So first thing I want to point out here is that all of these things change considerably with how quickly you're going. And it's two levels here. Like one, the approaches that work when you're delivering quarterly are likely not to work when you're delivering many times a day. And very often, some of the things that work really well when you're delivering many times a day aren't going to work when you're delivering quarterly or monthly, right? The practices are just different, right? And some of this gets to the idea that if you're releasing slowly, you've got a lot of stuff that is being worked on or is ready to be released. And you are going to need some sort of systems to manage all of that stuff, right? Because there's a lot of it that's piled up over the course of a quarter. All of the systems that are designed for managing a pile of stuff that's come up over a quarter are just going to get in the way when you don't have big piles of stuff because you're releasing every day or more than that. So let's start by looking at the left-hand side of this in some more depth. And so this is looking at kind of practices and approaches of when you're delivering from quarterly to monthly. And one way of looking at this is, if you're in an organization, right, if we go back a few years that was delivering software once a year, right, the sorts of things that you would need to do to deliver quarterly or even monthly are relatively modest. I think I'd say you're going to need to probably graduate off of manual deployments, and you're going to automate that somehow, probably with a release orchestration tool. You're going to need some kind of agile approach, but it might be something that's aligned with release trains, like the scaled agile framework, SAFe. You probably can still do your deployments of database code by, creating a ticket or calling your DBA and having them do that by hand. You can do that once every month or two. That's fine. Your architecture, right? We said this is DevOps at the speed of the architecture. Your architecture can still be that distributed system with a lot of coupling and a lot of things that break each other that need to be coordinated across release trains, right? Both at deployment time as well as in your agile approach. You can get away with that as you're driving down to monthly. You don't need to re-architect. If I come back up, you don't need to reorg, right? The DevOps people are like, oh, we want small cross-functional teams where my testing people and my security people and my ops people and my developers are all on one team together. That's an awesome practice. If you're just trying to speed up from an annual deployment or an annual release to a monthly, you can get away with still having your QA and security teams as different departments or different teams. As you accelerate through this, you are going to need better and better collaboration between those teams and development, right? The testers and developers are going to have to work more closely together, but you don't have to do the reorg, right? They can still be separate teams. So you'll need more automation in testing. You'll need better collaboration in testing. But do you need your test coverage to be at 100%? No. Do you need to have all your testers in the same squad as your developers? No. Do I think that that's all a best practice that you should absolutely do? Yes. But you don't have to, right? You don't have to reorg in order to get to a quarterly deployment. Whatever branching strategy you're using will probably work up until you're at a monthly release. Kind of as you get past quarterly, the trunk-based development, maybe with some release branches, starts looking more and more attractive. But whatever that works. On the infrastructure side, if you still have VMs and you need to create a ticket and an ops team spins up your VM for you, yeah, you can do quarterly releases. It's not going to be a big problem. You're probably going to feel some frustration. That's like, I can't get a test environment when I want it. I need to think about these things in advance. But it's going to keep you from releasing quarterly? No, right? It'll be kind of okay. As you start accelerating, you're going to start feeling more and more pain, like I need a test environment on demand. And, platform as a service, container fabrics, even just good scripting against your VMware APIs, something like Terraform aimed at VMware can work. Put in your Ansible scripts against your VMware infrastructure, against your cloud provider, spin up those environments on demand. It's going to take a lot of pressure off, but you can push the old way of doing it to about a monthly release and you're okay. Then finally, as we get down to what are we going to do once this thing's out in production, and we look at monitoring, again, you don't need to reorg, right? Don't need everybody on the same team yet. So you're going to need better collaboration. That changes as you move from annual to quarterly to monthly. The collaboration requirements between ops and dev, those grow. But you don't have to change everything. Like how you deliver monthly looks a lot like how you deliver annually, just done better, right? We sprinkle in some automation, we manage the dependencies across things a little bit better, and we improve the coordination across teams. That's the approach, right? Now, this area, as we kind of bring the whole view back, as we move from like a monthly release towards a weekly release, you see a whole bunch of these lines kind of start or end in this space. Everything breaks, right? So if you've not radically changed your architecture, if you've not done significant reorgs, if your automation is still kind of bumpy and you're at a monthly release and someone says, all right, it's time to step this up a notch, let's move to a bi-weekly release, let's release every 2 weeks, you can expect a lot of pain, right? A lot of the systems that you have in place are going to start falling apart at the edges, right? The DBAs are going to cry out in pain that your updates are coming too fast for them to accommodate. Managing all of the dependencies across your services and which version of this goes with which version of that, that's going to start getting pretty dicey, right? The significant coupling and managing which versions, right? That puts pressure on your deployment approaches and your testing approaches, and figuring out which versions all go together, getting them tested and saying, yeah, we feel good about it before doing a release. Yeah, around this bi-weekly front, you're likely to be struggling, right? Now, if you've got re-web services in your app and it's a relatively small team, right? You're not that coupled with a bunch of other things. Yeah, maybe you'll be okay, right? If you've got some larger system with 40 web services and 8 message queues, and there's still an ESB in there, and kind of getting that system into a good enough position and then testing all of that every 2 weeks, it's hard, right? That's really, really hard. So we start seeing managing a whole bunch of branches fall apart and moving to trunk-based development. And I would include some of the Git flow elements is in, a trunk-based development approach. You move from comprehensive testing being optional, or yeah, it's good if we're somewhat automated, to yeah, we've got to have 100% test coverage, and we need to really believe in those test suites, and they really need to rock. A separate QA department? Nope. No. I mean, you might have a best practices group or providing some guidance, but the testers for the application are probably very tight with the developers at this point. They are the same team, right? So you've got the same team there. Ideally, the security people are the same team as well. You're going to start looking at feature flags a lot more, right? The whole idea of a feature flag and being able to release something and decouple the deployment from the release, that's not very valuable when you're only doing the deployment quarterly. It becomes a lot more valuable as you start deploying every week or two. And some of your testing is going to end up being testing in production. You're going to turn the feature on and go, that wasn't very good, and turn it back off. You're going to carry more risk into production. And so you're going to be more and more dependent on feature flags to help mitigate some of that risk. The coupling that you can handle in your architecture, again, managing a whole bunch of interrelated things, that really starts to fall apart here. You're bound by your architecture, right? You really need to be pretty decoupled at the two week mark and very decoupled as you move into weekly, right? So whether you're old school and you call that strict service-oriented architecture, or you're a cool kid and you call that a 12-factor microservice, like, doesn't matter. If you've got a bunch of services and when you change one service, you are worried about other things in the system breaking, you're not releasing multiple times a week, right? Because the testing and managing which versions go together is too much overhead. You only get there when you can change a thing after testing that one little thing and have reasonable confidence that you're not breaking everything else, right? This is why we called the session DevOps at the speed of your architecture. Right? The hardest thing to change, and there's a lot changing here, the hardest thing to change is moving from a big coupled mess to really nice decoupled microservices. And decoupled is the key thing here. It's much easier to take a distributed system with 10 services and turn it into a distributed system with 50 services and have those 50 services in a big ball that are all coupled with each other. Like, that's just coding, right? That's not that hard. And it gets you very little, right? It gets you some benefits from being able to scale individual services, perhaps, and that'll take advantage of cloud. It might get you some resiliency elements along the same lines, but it won't get you speed, right? To get time to market, it's all about decoupled architectures. And that really comes in as you're trying to move from monthly to weekly, right? So you got to do that. Generally, if you're going to take advantage of a decoupled microservice architecture for things like dynamic scaling, for some of the resiliency elements, etc., you're gonna want to be on some sort of a platform-based approach, like moving OpenShift, right? Containers are a really good fit here. And to take the absurd counterexample, if I had a decoupled microservice approach and I had 30 services running around and I wanted to have service 31, and in order to get service 31, I needed to file a ticket with my infrastructure ops team, who is then going to order a new server from my hardware provider and rack and stack it. And 3 months later, I might have a new service. We're not getting the benefits, right? Microservices really like cloud, right? And the benefits of cloud in terms of it being programmable infrastructure really shine when you're working back with decoupled microservices. And all of that is pretty boring, in my opinion, if you're releasing once a quarter. If you're not doing all of the other DevOps stuff that line you up to take advantage of this and release often, right? And often for you might be monthly, right? But every couple of weeks to faster is where I think this gets exciting, is stacking all of these things on each other. If you're going quarterly with these things, like, yeah, it's fine, right? And you're getting the benefits around resiliency, but it didn't give you the business agility, right? That your executives are probably pitched when you were looking at a platform frame. So these things tend to go together. And I think that brings us to that group out on the right? So when I think of cloud native, right, I do look at this as, yeah, your infrastructure is on a cloud of some sort, whether that's public or behind the firewall. It's probably platform based, right? Containers or serverless. But it also means that your architecture is designed for cloud, right? You've got the 12-factor microservices. You've automated all of your deployments of those decoupled microservices. You're probably taking advantage of some sort of fancy deployment, whether that's a feature flag or canary releases, some way that you are really minimizing the risk of each deployment, so that if you put it out there and it's bad, right, you have the good monitoring, probably with SRE, but you put it out there and it's bad, you can roll it back and nobody actually notices. Your teams are cross-functional, they are small. Your teams being small, again, matches up with 12-factor microservices. You know, there's the idea, Conway's Law, that your org chart looks very much like your architecture, basically. The classic example being that if you have a 3-pass compiler, you are going to have 3 teams, right, building it. In microservice land, as you decouple services, and as you have smaller services, you move from teams of 100 with these really big meetings to small teams that own a couple of services together. If you have coupling, it's more likely to be within the team boundaries, but hopefully you don't. And then those teams interact with each other a little bit more formally than they would have in the past. And you have team APIs just like you have APIs within your services. So your teams, both testing, security, and monitoring, you've got a lot more kind of interaction where those skills are coming into the application team or residing alongside the application team in the case of SRE, if you go that route. Your development is really simplified in terms of branching strategy. There's production branch, basically. You're adding complexity around deployments with feature flags while removing complexity as you don't need to release a bunch of interconnected things together. You move towards kind of simpler pipeline constructs where you're only saying one thing gets deployed to each environment. And then you got your decoupled microservices running out on a platform. Life's good. And then again, I haven't talked about databases for a while, but you've solved the database schema problem, right? Where database schema is relatively hard to deploy. Initially, you ignored it by just having that be done manually. But by the time you're cloud native, you're either in a situation where you've architected yourself out of the problem, where the app is compatible with multiple database schemas, or you've automated your schema updates with something like DB Maestro or Liquid Base in order to deal with it. But one way or the other, and potentially both, your databases, and I'd say your other kind of tricky middleware you've addressed. So kind of summarizing this out, I really like this model because I will talk to my clients and they'll say, we are moving our apps to decoupled microservices running on OpenShift. Great, love it. And then we can start talking through some of these other elements, right? Or they can just review this and they can say, oh, we didn't think at all about how we're going to handle the database schema. Right? And I can say, okay. So if you don't handle it, you're probably going to be releasing monthly. before your DBAs really crack under the strain. Maybe a little bit faster, but not a lot. And then you can make that decision about, all right, how far into our focused work on moving to decoupled microservices are we going to be before we circle back and deal with our database problem? All right. What will break as I move from any speed to any other speed tends to be pretty accurate. And I've definitely talked to clients in the past, right? And said, all right, you did this move. Did these things break where we thought they would break? And yes. So this model works nicely. It tells you where practices will break. And when someone comes and tells you, yes, we are going to do extreme trunk-based development because Jez Humble tells me that's the right thing to do. It's great. Also, I'm going to release quarterly. You say, okay. You're probably going to have a release that's already out there that you're going to be doing hot fixes on, right? And you've got your new changes in trunk. Those probably need to be in different places unless you're going to do really aggressive branch by abstraction or something. So maybe you need to have a release branch there. All right. It's really predictable when you've got these cadence mismatches, and you can have a conversation around it and address it. Because when you take a little bit from the right and mix it with a little bit from the left, it's often a mess, or at least it's often disappointing. So having an educated conversation around that, hugely valuable. That's why I wanted to share this chart with you. I think at this point, we'll see if there are any questions and go from there. So, yeah, let's pop into questions. And down at the bottom here, this whole time, I've had my Twitter handle. So if you want to tweet at me later, that would be social media platform number, what, 4 or 5 that we're dealing with here, Karina?
I guess I should come off mute.
Right.
Thanks, Eric. So that slide is really powerful. It kind of shows the chaos that is really going through each step of the DevOps journey, right? And re-architecting from or to a new cloud native architecture.
Yeah.
So one thing that I wanted to ask is, many enterprises, especially larger enterprises, are going to be in multiple stages of that journey, right?
Yep.
So how do you manage, how do you communicate that amongst the separate teams without stirring some fear? Because there's always fear of the unknown, right? Change. So where do you start?
Yeah, so I think really good question. So the classic answer here that the Gartner analysts pushed for a number of years, and I think they're starting to do it less, is the idea of bimodal IT, right? You're going to say, these are my applications that are cutting edge, and I'm going to do all of the cloud native stuff there, and they're going to fly. And then I've got my other applications, and maybe they're my systems of record, and we're going to do it the old way with them. We're going to do like waterfall development and generally not invest a lot in automation. And so we'll break it in half and have 2 models. And like that kind of works in that it at least says that, hey, what's working over here is not going to work over there, and it's okay, right? It also relegates a huge part of an enterprise to not improving. And that makes me angry. And I think it's also short-sighted in that for any interesting system, a little bit of a strong statement. You get a blend, right? I think about when banks started doing mobile check deposit, right? So you're taking a picture of something with your phone, and there's got to be some like image processing happening and all of that. And I think shiny new banking feature attached to a mobile app, like clearly system of engagement, like that would be in the cool kid category that you would modernize. But in order to actually deposit the check, like you're definitely doing some mainframe transactions on the back end and you're touching the system of record. And anytime you have those sorts of systems, you end up with the shiny new thing needing features from the old thing in order to make it work or make it perform better or whatever. And you end up with this speed mismatch and everyone's sad and frustrated and angry with each other. And so, yeah, maybe the mainframe apps that are actually taking a check deposit don't need to be updated multiple times a day, right? I believe that. But if they were able to move from an annual release to that monthly release to the biweekly release, the frustrations and the tensions they're going to have with the system of engagement guys are going to be way down, right? And so you want everybody improving. And as you look at it, there's always going to be a bunch of systems that are kind of in the middle. And you got to figure out which side of things you're going to be on. And that stinks, right? So what about the part of that app that's actually doing the image processing? All right, maybe that's running on some VMs. And yeah, it's not able to run many times a day, but it's faster than the mainframe guys. Where do you put it? So there's a concept from my friend Carmen Diardo, who said, look, I don't want two speeds on my car, right? I want at least a bunch of gears, and preferably I'd like a CVT, the continuously variable transmission. For any given app, I want to see where's your architecture, what kind of infrastructure you're running on, what regulatory inputs do you have? And then let's find the process that lets you move as quick as you can with as high quality as you can and move on. So I like that sort of a framing, and that I think that also works with the graphic in that it says, yeah, there's a spectrum. And you want to be as fast as you can be on the spectrum. So.
And you mentioned on the left-hand side of the graphic that there's more reorgs because if you need to move from quarterly, monthly into weekly. So how do you match that up? Because now we're talking people, and when you're talking reorgs, and
it's always people, isn't it? Yeah, no, I mean, I think the people shifts are the biggest ones. And if you do move towards better collaboration before the radical reorg, then that's good. But yeah, I think that's the biggest change that a lot of organizations have to have. And it goes back to the classic problem in DevOps from 10 years ago, which is you have a VP of app who's incentivized to crank out a lot of new apps and a lot of new updates, and a VP of ops who's incentivized to keep all the systems running. And as long as you have the two VPs and their incentive structures are effectively in conflict with each other, there's going to be tension, right? So the core observation of DevOps is, in order to deliver quickly with high quality and have happy people, kind of want the reorg. And that's a really awkward conversation with those VPs. So I think, we all have multiple services organizations who love helping with those sorts of things. But yeah, that's the big challenge, is the people stuff.
So Brian, thanks for joining. Do you have?
Hey, Karina.
was going to ask if you had an opinion, but I'd be surprised if you didn't, on DevOps and adoption of DevOps, at least from going from a monolithic architecture to more of a cloud native, and teams, being in different buckets in that spectrum.
Yeah, and I apologize for being late. I had a chance to go through all of Eric's content before. I think he does a really good job of not only outlining sort of what the change looks like, but more importantly, like what drove the change, what was the impetus for change. For me, having talked to a lot of companies that have gone through this, the ones in which they change for change's sake tend to struggle. They struggle because the motivators for the individual people, while at a company level you might say, hey, we're going to go faster, we're going to save money, we're going to be more productive, you haven't addressed that sort of human thing, which is what's in it for me. And it's very easy for people to have apathy or say, look, change involves things. I think what we're seeing, and this is actually kind of good timing, although none of us are super happy about being in this COVID thing. COVID's changing everybody's business, right? COVID, unfortunately, is probably the greatest digital transformer we're all going to find. And the companies that I've seen that have become successful in this are able to use, and again, it's not always COVID, but they're able to use a problem in the business. It could be a new competitor. It could be we had bad earnings for the month. It could be, we just lost 6 people, whatever it might be. That makes the change personal to people, because they now realize, okay, this could be bigger than our group, but it's going to impact us. They may cut our budgeting. So I think, like people say sometimes, don't waste a good crisis. That's always sometimes the best starting point. And then from there, you have the opportunity to say, look, this is where we want to go, sort of begin with the end in mind. This is where we want to get to, and you can build backwards from that. If you're just trying to deconstruct an org chart to fit this new model, really, really, really hard, just on its surface.
It's like, what do we want to do in the business? What does that require technology to do to support it? And then how do we all need to change in order to get there? Yeah, that's perfect, Brian.
And it doesn't have to be a completely burning platform, but it could just be as simple as, let's say you're in the restaurant business right now. You're saying to yourself, what if nobody comes in the building? That doesn't mean you no longer make food. It just means, what if nobody comes in the building? How do you change that? And there's technology aspects. So take a simple example like that everybody can wrap their head around and say, if our business changes such that you ask that, what if nobody does something? Now you've got an impetus to change. And I think what you find in those situations is people get pretty creative, right? If you come to people and just say, look, new year, we all got to grow 10%. You don't get a lot of creative ideas, but you put some concerns in people, and you're going to get, a little bit of panic, but you're going to get a lot of creativity come out of it. And those are always good things to drive change.
No, I think you're right on. And I mean, the first core insight, I think, for agile development, or at least on the short list, is, hey, these developers, they should probably talk to the business people some.
Yeah.
And, when that actually happens, the whole annual release cycle is quickly like, hey, that wasn't okay. When I ask for something, I'd like it sooner. Right? That's always the first thing the business wants. Followed by, last month we had an outage and I really didn't like that. Could we never have an outage again? And so I think that better connection between the technologists and, quote, the business almost always drives things in the right direction. And if the techies are not talking to business stakeholders, you're not going to have alignment. It's not going to go well.
Yeah, and you almost need, I mean, the classic problem that the techies have with the business is always, and you just sort of highlighted it, every every business problem comes across as it's a priority one problem. It's the number one problem. So I want to make more money. I want things to be faster. I don't want things to be down. And so, the classic agile or even waterfall approach is, well, which one do you want to prioritize? And you're never gonna have the line business folks or the business leaders go, well, I'll prioritize one versus the other. What I think you need is to go, how do we have a structured conversation, right? An ongoing conversation that says, if you're not going to prioritize them, like, how do we have a conversation that either funds it properly or helps them understand where the trade-offs are? Because I think a lot of times the business doesn't understand the technical trade-offs they make, and the techie groups don't understand, why the business can't prioritize some things. And so it can't just be a one-time conversation, right? I mean, you almost have to create a discussion structure that says, here's how we're going to talk about this, right? Like, here's how we're going to explain some of these things. And in some cases, you're going to have to, just like we do DevSecOps or, whatever it is, like, you're going to have some people that speak, quote unquote, multiple languages, right? You're going to have somebody in tech that understands, how do I explain stuff as if I'm talking to an accountant? Or the accounting team or the sales team is going to say, how do I explain this to you that, this next quarter is the most important thing we can do. And if we can grow 10% of customers, that trickles down into 5 or 6 other things. It's just like DevOps, right? We're sort of saying, hey, it knocks down silos. These silos are between the money groups and the technical groups, between the sales groups and the marketing groups. Some of it is just kind of getting the right language right. And sometimes you just have to go, look, admit that I don't know how to talk to them, but there probably is somebody who does, who can play, middle person or kind of translator.
Yeah, well, and it's an interesting thing I've seen out of a lot of organizations over the last few years is valuing that domain expertise, valuing the people who understand the business, who are technologists, much more highly than in the past. So there was a talk, I want to say Liberty Mutual gave it. I may have this wrong, so I have the wrong company, forgive me. But they talked about really trying to shift towards having more developers and less support people, I don't know a better term, within IT. So release managers, product owners, infrastructure folks who are spinning up things in response to tickets. And so they were like, okay, we want to go from about 40% developers to 70% developers. We're not adding that much staff. So we're going to have to tell a bunch of people who have jobs not doing development that they can't be developers anymore, right? And I think the most efficient thing to do as a bad business person would be to say, well, we're going to fire our bottom 50% of everybody else and hire a bunch of devs, right? But what they did instead is say, okay, we're going to go to 50% of the people or so and say, look, your job doing what you're doing now is not going to be here. We will send you to go train up on coding, right? And it's going to take 6 months and we'll pay for that and all of this. And if you want to be a developer, we want you to go through that because you understand our business, right? You understand what's important. You understand what all the words mean when they come in as requirements. You new to development are going to be a better developer for us than some random skilled developer who doesn't understand our business. And I've seen airlines doing things like grabbing people out of the business and pulling them into IT to bring in that knowledge. And all of these things seem to be just trying to improve the understanding of the app teams with what the business is going through.
Yeah, it's
all
a
that
little
drives
bit.
quality.
I mean, it's a little bit like what SRE is designed to do, but it's for cultural reference, it's the guy that got dragged into the meeting in Office Space by the Bobs who goes, I take the requirements from the customers and I give them to the engineers, and they keep going, what do you do around here? And we laugh at that, but that domain expertise is valuable, right? It's and I think the trick to that is call that person whatever you need to, right? Don't get hung up on doing the thing where you're a junior engineer, you're a senior engineer, and then they feel intimidated or an imposter. Just say, look, you're a liaison to the business, and if you're learning code, cool. If you're spending some time talking to your customers, that's as valuable too. Yeah, I think those bridge roles are really important.
So we do have a question. The business stakeholders do not understand the techies. So how do we connect the dots? How do we facilitate that communication and understanding? It's like a relationship, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think step one is, with any, and this is hard with techies, and it's harder with younger generations. Step one in any bad communication is to start communicating, right? It's not that people don't understand. It's typically they're not exposed to things. So this is, if the problem is we don't understand each other, start getting them in a room, right? And it can just be in short periods of time. It can be 15 minutes on the weekly meeting. It can be, designate someone on the business side and somebody on the engineering side and say, look, you two are two in a box now. And if that's a legitimate business problem, right? Like they don't understand each other and that's impacting the business, tie those folks at the hip, right? Do the thing you do at a picnic. You tie the two of them together. They're a three-legged race. They're going to figure out how to either go fast or fall down, but they'll figure it out. I don't know. I wish there was some John Willisy, Deming thing I could point out, but like sometimes it's just like I joke all the time. Everything you need to know about DevOps or even Agile, like you learned in first grade. Play nice with others, communicate. Don't throw your poop all over the place. Like basic things like that you learned in first grade. You have these skills. You just gave up on them, and sometimes you just got to come back to them.
Yeah, I think a challenge for techies, though, is we can often refer to something, and then the fellow techie will recognize the value of that thing. And what it really is valuable on is like it solves a problem that's caused by the solution to a problem that we solved with something that was caused by a solution and there's some horrible chain, right? Like, why does Istio exist, right? Like, what's the chain of solutions that got us down to we need Istio? And then you just tell, do a one-line explanation of that to your business stakeholder who just wants their app to work a little bit better. And you're like, hey, no, I'm going to go implement this other piece of infrastructure thing. And they're like, so I think part of that is to say, look, we are trying to outcome that the business wants, but we are limited by problem. And so in order to get there, in order to get you what you want, I need to do a bunch of junk on the back end. And then you have the problem that the business isn't necessarily going to believe you because they do think that techies tend to like to just fiddle with stuff, which is true, totally do. And so you do need to come back to them in a month and say, we did the thing and now we're able to thing you want, right? Show that if they give you rope, that you're going to come back and deliver what they want out of it, that your time to market's improved by 2 days, whatever it is. And then the next time you say, I need to tech mumbo jumbo in order to help you go faster, they're more likely to say, yeah, go for it. Or, no, this is the most important release we're doing all this year. Wait on that thing and just get me my darn feature. And then you're in a better place, right? That's a reasonable conversation. I don't know, I'm guessing at why the business stakeholders don't understand tech, but
it sounds like you're saying that people should be communicating.
Yeah, way too much of my job is marriage counseling.
Well, and a lot of times these are like let's make it a simple thing. I mean, the reason people in business sort of give up on other groups is either they overpromise and underdeliver, or they're constantly too expensive, right? And yeah. I think we've gone through this stage already where the world got told that IT was gonna change your business, and software's eating the world, and all this sort of stuff. And you had IT organizations that that didn't necessarily deliver, that slowed down the business. They sort of got a bad rap, and then what's come along is the developers have gone, oh well, good. Now the cloud can fix things for me. The public cloud can fix things for me. We can bypass central IT. Well, guess what, right? Like the same things that the business will measure, whether you think you're bypassing some central group or you're not bypassing them, are going to come back to you, right? So you're still going to have to deliver things on time, hopefully ahead of time, and you're still going to have to either be on budget or be under budget. And so, if you're not practicing those basic kind of communication skills, which is kind of exactly like you said, like, I mean, that why do we have Istio is sort of a great example. Like that almost ought to be a litmus test for everything. Of if you can't explain why you need Istio and apply that to any situation you have, just replace Istio with whatever you have, then both sides ought to be questioning what it is, right? Like, is this really a problem? Does this make our customers any happier? Does it make us any more money? And do I really need that? But it's kind of a perpetual thing that comes along. It's not, okay, that old group is out. Now, it's clear sailing for us, right? The new groups that are taking over these things and are having these deep backlogs are going to have the same problems if they think that they can just keep hacking away at software and call it experiments or whatever. Like, the business is still going to say, did you deliver what we asked for? Did you do it on time? And if not, we'll find somebody else to do it. Because the one constant in all this is we don't have any business problems anymore that aren't technology centric. So there's always going to be a need for someone to solve that. It's just a matter of whether you or your group will be the people doing that. And if you choose to be very antisocial and not know how the business runs, then somebody will come along and do it better than you.
Well, and the real worry is not that someone else in your company will do it better than you, but that your company's competitors will do it so much better than you that your company's in trouble. I think we're seeing plenty of right now in the market.
Yeah. That also kind of feeds into AIOps. That's the new buzzword. So everybody wants to be doing AIOps, but what does that mean to your business? How do you put that in your DevOps strategy?
At the end of the day, we're trying to keep our software that's valuable running and doing valuable things. And applying AI makes a lot of sense when we have more things changing than we did in the past, and we have more endpoints doing work because we've got moved to the microservice model so we can go faster. Right? There's more going on than a human can keep their eyes on realistically. So let's get a helper brain to chip in. That's how I try to explain AIOps to the business, but that's also not my specialty. So I'm probably not doing a great job.
No, I think it's a good explanation, given that it's a nebulous concept. I mean, it's a nebulous term. It's a nebulous concept. I think the simplest way I might explain it is, look, there are lots of, like, computing is always like, there are lots of day-to-day things that are always the same. And we just keep evolving to say, okay, for the things that are the same, or the things that we can predict, right? Like, they're consistent patterns. Why are we putting people against that problem? Why aren't we putting computers against that problem, right? If, people get tired, people fall asleep, people go on PTO, people, get busy with meetings, like, take those things that we know how to do or that you can define, and apply computers against that. And at one point, they'll be rudimentary things, and at other points they'll get smarter. And the smarter they get, the more we'll call them AIOps. But that's kind of what it is. It's I mean, you, at the end of the day, and the business will understand this concept, you always want to take your best and brightest people and let them work on hard problems that need creativity. you don't want to take your best and brightest and apply them to monotonous things that you could offload in some way. That's essentially what AIOps is trying to do for IT.
No, I think if it's monotonous and repetitive, like a robot can do it. And people are really bad at being robots. So not only is it inefficient, they're just bad at it. Computers are good at being robots, and they're efficient at it. So if it's repetitive and predictable, it belongs to computers. Simple. Right. And we're seeing the same thing. And the business people get this because they've got like robotic process automation, whatever RPA is. Right? Whatever the business process is, that's repeatable and boring. We're going to automate filling out that form too.
Yeah. Right. And the businesses have done this forever. We used to go to banks, and then you had bank tellers, and then you had ATM machines, and now you have mobile banking, and like it's just a natural progression. Yeah.
Yep. All right.
So we have a couple minutes left. I was going to say, so Brian, you just did a podcast on DevSecOps, and it seems like DevSecOps should just by nature be folded into DevOps. Seems like there's this whole continuum of ops, like you're just saying about AIOps, just on the continuum.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to Dan Papadreas from Sysdig. I think it's like everything. So I was originally calling it DevSecOps, and Dan was calling it Secure DevOps, and we kind of said, okay, well, do the words matter? And he said, yeah, it does sort of matter to a certain extent. To a certain extent, there's a people aspect of this, which is you're sort of shifting the security expertise left, right? Put them near the application teams, closer to the beginning of your sort of software supply chain. And then the other half of this is, just like we said with AIOps, if you can apply some computer tools to that so that, for the repetitive things that are going on, go ahead and do that. So the conversation ultimately was, from a people perspective, process perspective, try and embed your security people closer to the application teams. But don't skimp on saying, hey, I have tools that scan my containers, that sign images, that report vulnerabilities, and dig through logs and stuff. So it's kind of it comes back to the thing we always talk about. You can't skimp on people and process, and you can't skip on technology. It's just finding that right balance between them.
Yeah. No, I think DevSecOps. I expect this to be a short-term word, a couple of years. Right, we've realized that we did the DevOps thing, and too many organizations didn't include security. So we're going to say include security by saying DevSecOps until they do. And then everyone will be like, why are we saying DevSecOps? It's just DevOps. We're all in this together. But we forgot about, and I don't know what the next group we forgot about is, user experience design or something. And then we'll talk about design DevOps or something. But I think security is the problem child these days, and we got to bring it into the fold and give it a big hug. And I see we did get the question, where do we see DevOps in 10 years? I think DevOps is just how we deliver software, and we're going to get more collaborative. We're going to pull everybody into the fold, and the seams between the business and IT will blend away as digital transformation happens more and more. That's my take. Brian, where do you see this going?
Yeah, I agree. I think, if the thing that's not the big buzzword right now doesn't become sort of boring and hidden, it probably failed. But yeah, I mean, if it's like you said, if we're building software right, and the trend is we will keep building iterative software, we will deploy it more frequently. Yeah, DevOps just becomes software development. I mean, it just kind of blends back into that thing. I think if you're looking out that far, even if you're looking out 5 years, if we haven't stopped talking about it, we haven't quite figured out even how to do the software part of it yet.
All right, well, thank you. We're out of time. Really appreciate both of you joining. And Eric, that was excellent presentation. Still love the entire graphic and what it shows. And for everybody else, thank you again for coming to another OpenShift Commons. Go to commons.openshift.org and you'll find more briefings and calendar, and join Commons if you haven't already. So thank you again, and until next time.
Thanks, everybody.